Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming back for week 2. I don't want you to be confused. Oh, shoot. I should start let me start my stopwatch so I know what's happening timing wise. Okay. I don't want you to be confused by the materials that are sent out that say week 1 because I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but we actually start with week 6, which is building confidence. So this says communication week 1, but we're actually in week 2. So thank you for coming back. Hopefully everyone comes back. The other thing I wanted to kind of start with is I know that we talked about homework of last week, which actually I'm going to stick that slide in there. I'm going to make a note of that. Stick in the homework slide. So the homework that we talked about last week, I'm actually going to ask you to, at the end, kind of share out some things about it. So even though I don't have that up there now, I'm going to add, let me write this down, add a homework slide. So then I'll pull up the homework slide and just say, these are the things that we talked about doing last week over this week. If you didn't get to any of them, I don't want you to feel bad or feel like you're not doing this well. It's totally fine. We can just hopefully share out some of the things that maybe you tried and maybe you saw some differences, or maybe you experienced some things, or maybe it didn't work so well. So at the end of this week's lesson, I'll kind of just ask you to fill me in on how things went over this week, working on your building confidence objectives. So yeah, this week we're going to talk about communication. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you so that we can get started. And right now everyone is muted, but again, at the end, if you have any questions or if you want to ask questions during, you can click on that chat box and chat your questions and Christy can see them. So you can go ahead and do that. Okie doke. So all right. So again, I'm Sue and Christy is here helping us with all the technology. And we're going to talk about communication today. So I kind of wanted to start, last week I started with a couple quotes that I really like. And this week I wanted to start with just like a brief kind of explanation or example of some really well-known research about communication in young children. So if you work in the field of early childhood, or you studied it, or you studied kind of language at all, everyone sort of talks about this study. It was done by Hart and Risley. And there have been some spin-off books about it and people who have like explored the different aspects of this study. I mean, it's really, really famous. And so instead of talking like researchy, we'll just talk about it kind of in a general sense. But basically, if you wanted to Google it, I'm sure you could read the whole thing, which might be very boring, but you at least could find some other information about it too. So I just kind of wanted to put the name of it there. The name of their article is called The 30 Million Word Gap. Basically what happened is they took 42 families with children ages 7 months to 3 years. So they started out with the kids very young, under 1, and they followed them for 3 years. I'm not sure that what intervals they followed them, if they checked up with them every month or every 3 months or what it was, but over that course of that period of time, they were checking in with these families. And basically what they would do is go to these families' homes, sit with them for, I think it was like 2 hours, and they would really just count the verbal interaction. So count the talking between parents and children, just counting it. Like imagine making tallies of child says something, mom responds, child says something, dad responds. So they're just making tally marks, and they called them utterances. So anything that was said between mom and child, dad and child, or whoever else was in the household. They also kind of noted the quality of these interactions, so whether they were negative or positive. That's kind of self-explanatory. So whether it was the child or the parent wasn't communicating positively, they would just kind of make a note of that too. So kind of simple study in the sense that, that's really all that they were looking for. And they just sat there quietly kind of observing. Well, what they found was there were huge differences, things that they weren't expecting to find, significant differences at ages 3 when they ended the study. And then they actually followed up with some families all the way through 3rd grade, so about approximately the age of 7. And there were just huge, significant differences in the amount of language that those children were using. So the kids who were spoken to often, the kids who had a lot of interactions with their parents, were doing better with their language skills, were doing better in reading. They had actually more stable friendships, probably because they were able to communicate better with their peers. So they were showing all these positive signs. And then you can imagine the kids who really weren't talking very frequently with their caregivers were kind of on the lower end of the spectrum. They didn't work with peers as well. They weren't scoring as high in terms of, verbal understanding and reading. So I say this because, I just want to kind of convey how important your communication is with your child. And if you feel like you're not already doing a lot of that, then that's great. That means you can start now. That means you're learning new information, and when you know better, you do better. So talking is very, very important. So in the packet that was sent to you by Christy, there is a checkup A. So this kind of is the same setup that we had last week. So it's just asking you about, basically what are your child's communication habits now? Like, what are you noticing about them? So they're asking you in these questions specifically kind of maybe what's happening at school. So if you can think about, what it is that the teachers maybe communicate to you about your child in the classroom. What do you see happening at home? So what are their strengths? What are some things that, they find challenging? Do they have a hard time sitting still? They have a hard time following directions? They have a hard time telling you what they need? And then just below that is the, activity level. Are they always moving, always on the go, always got to be somewhere? Or are they kind of quieter? They can kind of play by themselves. And then just the ability for them to follow directions. The ability to cooperate. So again, all of these things are really linked to language and communication. So maybe it sounds like it's kind of unrelated, but the more that your child is able to express what they need, and the more that you can respond to that need, the more you're going to get compliant behavior or good behavior because they're able to tell you what they want and what they need. So if that's not there, which you can see a lot of times with younger kids, let's say kids up to the age of 2 who maybe don't have full sentences yet, there can be frustration in interactions. There can be a lot of crying, biting, hitting, grabbing things, because they don't have the language to use to say what they need. So as your child gets older and learns language, you see a lot of those behaviors diminish. Or they can express to you with their language, that they're unhappy instead of hitting you. Anyway, so it goes on to so this is just a way to kind of rate where your child is now. So you can go over this at another time. If you already completed it, then that's great. I think it's also a good conversation to have with your partner or whoever is, caring for your child often, or it's a great conversation starter for your child's teacher. So asking them how they communicate at school. Do they tend to be quiet? Do they tend to play with kids? Because sometimes your kid can be very different, in the classroom. And then how does your son or daughter provide information? How do they communicate? Does he or she like to talk? Do they like to tell stories? Do they like to show you? Do they like to draw a picture? So you know your child best. So really just kind of thinking about the times throughout the day when they are communicating things to you and how they they do that best or how they prefer to do that. So our goal this week is to just establish a routine and give your child a special time to share information. This says about preschool activities, but really about anything. So wanting to make that time and that space in your day, in your daily routine, to have some special communication time with your child. And then we'll go over a little bit later in the lesson the activity and parent tip cards. And this is also, I'll show, oh crap, I didn't think about that. Hey, I'm not gonna have time. It is a good time to use the concept cards because it just is a means of starting a conversation. And I'll talk about that again in a minute. Oh, so I wanted to share this or show this really quick couple minute YouTube video, which I will have set up tomorrow. I just left the link here.
Positive communication with our children helps them develop in a healthy way and strengthens our bond with them.
Parents can really kind of tune into what their kids are saying to kind of build those communication skills, help their children build language skills by saying, you know, what did you say, and repeating back what the kids said and reflecting on that emotion that kids are expressing.
There are 4 steps for communicating positively with your child. Step 1, praise. Use praise to help your child know what you'd like them to do. Be clear and specific with your praise. Instead of good job, say, good job putting away your toys.
Great job putting your toys away, Jenny. It's very, very important as a parent to be conscious as much as possible of what your kids are doing, but you're checking in on them enough that there's opportunities to acknowledge what they're doing, that it's good.
Step 2, imitation. You can copy or imitate the things your child is doing that you want them to keep doing. This shows your child that you are paying attention to them and interested in what they are doing. When copying and imitating, make sure you do the things the way your child does. Do not try to do things better or faster than your child.
Then they see that you've recognized that they're doing something that you're also doing. Wow, mommy likes that. Mommy likes to play with my dolls too. So that must be something good that I'm doing. I'm going to do that again in the future.
Step 3, description. Describing or talking about what your child is doing while they play shows your child you are noticing their good behavior. You can act like a sportscaster who is telling people what is happening in a game. You are putting the red block on the green block and making a tall tower. Step 4, active listening. Giving your child your full attention when you are playing and talking with them can help build your relationship. At least once a day, try to really focus on being with your child. Try to decrease distractions like cell phones so you can give her your full attention. One way to actively listen is to talk about what your child is doing or to repeat what your child says. You can also add more detail to encourage them to talk to you more. For example, your child may say, "I colored it." But with active listening, you may add to that and say, "Yes, you colored her dress blue and red." Active listening can also help children name their feelings. For example, if your child is crying and says she's not happy, you may say, "You seem unhappy and sad." Playtime is a great time to practice praise, imitation, description, and active listening. You can also use these skills anytime you are with your child. At dinner, in the car, and when giving a bath.
Okay, so that's just kind of a quick video overview. And I can share that link with you if you wanted to watch it again. That it's actually from the CDC. They have a couple other videos that are related that are also really helpful. So that one is pretty much just talking about communicating with your child. So giving those 4 top tips, I guess. So praising, that's something we talked about last week too with building confidence. So praising does build confidence, and it builds connection with your child. So they know that you notice them doing the right thing. And hopefully you were able to do some of that this past week. And we can talk about that in a minute. And imitating. So this might seem a little weird, or maybe it's something you're not used to. But again, if we're learning new skills and you're going to try things that you haven't done before, and they might not feel comfortable at first. But by imitating, so in that video example, he's playing with the dolls kind of the same way that she's playing with it, or you're drawing with your child kind of the same, you don't have to be drawing the same picture, but we're both going to draw a dog, we're both going to draw a house. Or kind of just approaching your child when they are at play and seeing what they're doing and joining them. So they're building blocks, you just start to build with them. So this imitating also builds confidence and connection. What you're communicating by doing that is what you're doing is important. I want to spend time with you. And, you're reflecting back to them that the behavior that they're showing is positive and something that you want to see more of. So that's what you're doing, even non-verbally, really. And then describing, this really helps to build language. So you're using words with them, describing what they're doing, like, oh, you put the red block on the green block, and like in their example, you're telling them colors, you're giving words to what they're doing. So that not only is a way to communicate, but it builds language and it promotes them, responding to you. Also shows you're paying attention to what they're doing. You can't describe what they're doing unless you're there, right? Unless you're watching them, unless you're paying attention. And then finally, active listening. So they said something about being with, which I just wanted to kind of point out to you. That's something also I've talked about in another training that I just took is, that idea of, I want you to think about your adult relationships, and those people that you consider to be really great listeners and really people who you want to go to when you have a problem or when you seek comfort from someone, that person. What is it that they really do for you? And I would be willing to guess that they are with you. They're simply being there. They're paying attention. They're engaged. They may not necessarily be telling you advice all the time. They're just able to listen and hear you. And so that's really what your kids are looking for too. They're looking for that person in you to be actively listening and paying attention to their needs. And it teaches them to be good listeners. So they're kind of going to learn from that action from you. And then again, in your packet, the page something, I'll have to look that up. I don't have my packet sitting right by me right now. The secrets of kind of carving out this time for communication is finding a regular time. So thinking about your day and thinking, when is a time that I have 5 or 10 minutes with my child that I can clear some space. Like, okay, it's right after school when we get home. We usually are eating a snack together, or it's on the drive to school, or in traffic or whatever. It doesn't necessarily at first have to be this huge amount of time. I think you need to think of times during your day that are already popping up instead of having to figure out how to find another time, because that's stressful. Just think of a thing throughout your day when you have something that you're doing regularly that you can be more intentional about. So setting a regular time makes it easier to accomplish the communication, and finding a comfortable place, if that's possible, being able to spend time, maybe when you read a story at night or when your child's calmed down after they get home from school. That can be a good time for you to connect with them. So some of the do's and don'ts, I think I set them on another slide. Yeah, just to kind of make them a little bit bigger for you to see. So that little box on the sheet, which again, I think is helpful, is just a quick guide of the do's and don'ts. So offering your child undivided attention. So getting on the floor with them, this is again what we talked about in building confidence, letting them know that whatever they're doing is important. Meeting in a quiet space or when they've calmed down from their day. You know when your child is too revved up and too agitated to really have a good conversation. You can tell. So finding a time when you know they're a little bit calmer. Making eye contact, getting on their level, that's really important for them to feel heard by you. And you getting comfortable. So not, well, we're going to talk about that in a second, the don'ts. And then asking specific questions. So kind of like what we talked about last week is providing that specific praise, letting them know specifically what they're doing right. When you're communicating, asking very specific questions. So instead of saying, how was your day? Which I'm guaranteeing when you ask your 4-year-old how their day was, so how do they say? What do they say? Fine, good, okay. And that's all you get. So trying to think of maybe more specific questions you can ask. A good thing to do is ask your child's teacher. You know, when you go to pick them up from preschool or daycare, wherever they are, ask what they did that day. You know, ask specific questions about it. Oh, you went on a nature walk. Did you guys find any bugs? Did you guys talk about, the beach? I mean, what are they talking about? And you can then transfer that into specific questions for your child. So what did you learn about the beach? What kind of bugs did you see? Have you ever seen those bugs at home? I don't want you to overthink this. Talk to your child about things that they like to talk about. Do they love the movie Frozen? Who knows? Maybe I'm behind the times. I don't know. Maybe that's old now, but ask them questions about that. What would you want to play with Elsa if she was here to play with you? Just fun ways to kind of engage them in talking to you, because that's building your connection with them and building their language skills. And then the don'ts. So don't talk when you're upset or when you're busy. That's not to say that you can't, provide some boundaries or discipline when you're upset. I mean, we'll talk about that in another lesson, but when you're trying to have an intentional connecting conversation, when you're upset is not the time, because you're not going to be all these other things on the do side. You're not going to be quiet. You're not going to be making eye contact. You're not going to be offering undivided attention. You're going to be way too busy with your own stuff to provide that opportunity to be with your child. Don't interrupt them. Let them complete their thought, even if it's crazy. Even if we've all had conversations with, our kiddos, and kids say crazy things. They say things that don't make sense, and they say things that that's not how you necessarily would engage with an adult. And that's okay. That's because they're kids, they're imaginative. They don't necessarily know how the world works yet. So they will say funny things. And you just let them. Don't correct them. So then finally, correcting how your child does something. So that's also not an effective way to communicate. If the only way you're communicating is to say, oh no, you want to make a train track here, you got to put this here, you got to put that there, you got to put this here. It's be more effective for you to sit there and just kind of join in with what they're doing and say, I see you're making train tracks. That's fun. Do you want to ride a train someday? I mean, that's a different type of conversation than, here, let me show you how to do it. So I have, which I don't have in front of me, this is the thing that's in my office. I have a scenario of quality communication in one instance, and then not so high quality in another. So the first scene is basically the mom is playing with these animal toys with her son, and he picks up the shark toy or something, and he says roar, and she says, no, sharks don't roar. Actually, a shark's not a good idea. I don't know what sound the sharks make. Basically, she corrects him with what animal noise. And then the second scenario, the mom kind of goes with it, and they just have a fun conversation about animal noises. So I'll kind of use that as an example. And then moving on in your packet, on checkup B, so this is kind of just things that you can now do this coming week. So thinking about, the ways that you're communicating with your child regularly, and thinking of whether you know the answers to some of these, so answering as many as you can, and just thinking about, like, what new skills and ideas did my child learn in the past month at school? or with their babysitter, or whatever situation, they're in. Did your child have a good time at school this week? What did they do? What does he or she like to play with? Finding out in these different settings that your child is a part of what it is that they're doing. And that's a great way to foster conversation and new conversation about something, that you're not there for. So basically, these are great questions for your child's teacher or daycare provider, or I don't know, the babysitter that your child is with during the day. And the activity just talks about getting more involved with your child's school or the classroom. So being able to approach your child's teacher about what's going on in the classroom can open up that communication between you and the teacher, and she, can relay to you some of your child's strengths at school, which may be different than the ones at home. So you also had a parent tip and activity cards that went along with this week's lesson. So I'm just going to go over a couple of these and kind of see some things you could try this week. Takes a very long time to load. Okay, so encouraging your child to share information about their day. So these are just your parent tip cards. So they're kind of explaining the things that we just talked about, reminding you to find that time to communicate intently with your child. And just kind of going with them. So again, whatever it is, at the very beginning when we talked about this research study about parents talking to their children. And the researchers focused on whether they were speaking positively or negatively, but the content of the conversation really doesn't matter. Again, it doesn't, if your child is obsessed with a particular TV show or a movie, or I don't know, another kid at school, or whatever it is, if your child loves to play soccer, you don't have to talk to them about their colors and numbers all the time. That conversation is really enriching when you just talk about things they want to talk about things they're really interested in, because that shows that you're paying attention to the things that they like in their preferences. So making conversation. So encouraging your child to use phrases to talk about pretend events and past events. So again, that idea of like imaginative talk. Let's imagine that and this kind of goes along with whether you're willing to jump in and play with them and imitate, their play to a degree, and kind of jump in with that imagination. If you do tend to read stories at night, you can create a story together, and talk about, just every other sentence you make something up, like, oh, there was a bear who lived behind a tree, and then your child has to come up with the next sentence, so kind of being more open about those types of communication. It doesn't have to be restricted to a book. So this just kind of gives some like, do this, not this. So did John tell help your child tell what happened? Did John tell the teacher? Instead of, did John tell the teacher? Did the teacher get mad? What did the other kids do? So compounding those questions can be confusing for a young child. So kind of being direct and short with what questions you are asking. And then one of the other things we just talked about. So making your questions more specific. So did you finish building the house with Maria? Instead of, what did you do today? Or how was your day? Because those are very vague questions. Stopping and listening to what they respond. Repeat back what you heard. And then repeating that back also models those good listening skills. So it allows them to learn to become a better listener. showing interest, being expressive about what they're saying. And this all has to do with paying attention and really being with them. So these are just some of, you're welcome to write down your own ideas. This is another great one. After reading a book together, ask your child, tell me at the end of the story, what happened next? So again, kind of creating your own imaginative story. And one of the things that if you are able to join into the Shells group, is really making your own book and having your own story to tell. So that's like a really wonderful experience that can really help with just some fun communication.